podcast about sharing to the appropriate audience in the best way at the right time and how to receive when others share. I'm Wynne Leon, and in this episode, I'm with the incredibly bright and entertaining customer experience strategist, Karl Baisch, talking about how to share insight. Nicholas Christakis, a sociologist from Yale, has this really hopeful view of humans based on our ability to interact and cooperate with others. He says, we teach each other things. People take this for granted, but it's actually unbelievable. As we go through life, we ask questions, gather the data, and then we create the narrative for what it means over and over again. Speaking for myself, writing it out often helps me nail down the learnings that my mind is chewing on. Once we have them, we share those insights with different audiences, and sometimes it even sticks. We cycle through that process repeatedly, calling it life. So it's incredible to talk with Karl, who as a strategist does it professionally. Karl and I talk about asking the right questions in order to get a good answer, and he tells a great story about preparing a report about Twitter data, only to have to pivot to answer what the client really needed to know. Karl has so much deep experience in data sets, social media data, and creating actionable results that it is fascinating to hear him relate stories about the history and what works. His degree in creative writing is essential in providing the translation point between data scientists and the audience. We talk about insights and how they often get siloed within organizations. Just like with individuals, groups have to want an answer in order to hear it. Real change happens when there's enough curiosity to drive to a compelling result. And how wisdom comes when we can synthesize the data of our lives and come up with insights, but we still need the right audience to share with. He also relates creating insights to being able to adapt recipes. Once you have enough practice, you can understand what is and is not essential. Karl and I talk about our kids and how to help them be curious about what they are taking in, especially in terms of creating digital awareness as they navigate all the technology and options they have in our digital world. This is a great episode about the practice of creating insight. Join us as we dig into the who, what, when, where, and how of creating and sharing aha moments. Hi, Karl.
Hi, Wynne.
It's so good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
We share a passion for collaboration and also just continual learning through sharing insights, not only as consultants, but I think as people.
Yeah,
I think that's fair to say.
Definitely, yeah.
And your experience is as a customer experience strategist, amongst many other things.
That is my most recent role, yes.
Yes.
Customer experience strategy.
Yeah. So I want to dig into how you mine data into actionable insights. But the other day, you still told me this great story about sharing or not sharing in this case. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, sure. So as part of this happened before I was a customer experience strategist. I was just a general strategist. And one of the things that I did is if we were to do a strategy project that went into some sort of execution, I would manage the team of people that were doing execution. In this instance, it was a creative project. So we were working with designers and developers to build some things for a client. As like all these projects these days, we have shared folders and everyone's supposed to work collaboratively across teams and share their resources. And in this instance, we had a designer who was the lead designer on the project who was not in the habit of working like that. He liked to work from his own computer, which is fine as long as you on a regular basis are sharing it back with the team. Sure, whatever.
Got to share your work product somewhere, right?
You got to be adaptable to how different people work. So anyway, so he was working on his own computer. He went on vacation, and the client asked us for some files that he'd been working on. And
Mm.
the creative director and I went and looked on our shared drive because we thought that he had uploaded everything as we'd asked him to do before he went on vacation, and he hadn't uploaded them. And so it was a deadline, and the client was asking, and it was
Yeah.
something that we should have had, that we needed to
Right.
have. And so we had to figure out, well, how do you get that file? And it was a good reminder that, in a corporate environment, and this is when we were all in the office, like
Yeah.
you don't own any of this stuff.
Hmm.
And so talked to the creative director, and we were like, well, where's his computer? He must have left his computer here because he didn't take it home. He never took his computer home. So we knew it
Yeah.
was in the office. And so where is his computer? And so we figured out that his computer was in his desk drawer. So we went to try and get his computer out, and it was locked. And so I had to figure out, well, like someone has a key for this. So I went to the
Right.
office manager and asked the office manager if he could unlock this guy's desk for me so I get the computer out. And he looked at me as anyone would at that question, kind of like, maybe, like, to protect himself, he wanted me to get the general manager of the office to actually sign. He had a form. He found a form that
Wow.
the general manager had to sign in.
Yeah.
So I went through that route, and the general manager was like, why are you asking me to do
Yeah.
this? And so I had to explain it again for like the third time. And so I got the form and went and got the computer out of the desk. And as I was getting the computer out of the desk, people were like, well, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
why are you going into his desk? And I was like, well, here's the reason. Like, he wasn't sharing his files. And if, like, we need this, we have a deadline, and we have to remember that we don't own any of these materials in this
Yeah.
office. And people kind of looked at me sideways, but they were like, okay. And so got the computer out of the desk, and then took it to the IT guy. And the IT guy was actually more willing to help out than the
Yeah.
facilities guy. He
Yeah.
popped it open, and he's like, sure, admin password in. And then he kind of looked at me and he said, I don't really want to go through
Right.
all of these files. And I looked at him and I said, I don't want to either.
Yeah.
I don't want to go through, I don't, wading through all these files. So why don't you do this? Search. And I was like, just search for this thing.
Yeah.
And then if you find a file folder, flip it around and we can find the right files. And so he searched for it. He saw, he flipped it around, and we found the files that we needed to. And that whole process probably took 2 hours
Wow.
to do,
Right.
because there was a lot of conversations. And even at the beginning, like, should we do this?
Hmm.
Do we need to do this?
Right.
And we determined that we really did need to do it. And
Hmm.
then, we had a conversation about, the protocol is you share
Hmm.
things in a central location because we're working as a team, and we
Right.
have to be able to access each other's work. And,
Yeah.
and if you can't, then you find a creative solution and try and figure out how to do it. And
Right, right. I love that story because I mean it shows what happens when we don't share. And whether it be a file or something else, but it leaves everybody else sort of second guessing and
yeah,
having to scramble, right? I
yeah,
mean, it's not just work product, but if you think about people who are sort of closed books, we're all sort of like, okay, well, all right.
yeah.
Um, and in that case, it's company work product that
It
you
is. It
needed.
is. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, for him, I think it was control, right? Like,
Hmm.
he wanted to control what the creative director was able to see, what the final product was
Yeah.
going to look like. And, which I completely understand. I have taken the position of more of a, let's see how the sausage is made approach. Like,
Yeah.
let's see, I would rather see, we can get into talking about this. I would rather see an interim product so that I can use my experience to give some direction
Yeah.
to help,
Right.
figure out how to develop those insights so that you
Yeah.
can share them.
And I'd see, and I bet you've seen this too with technical people, especially people don't share because they're afraid people will understand how little they know, or that oh, I'm like, I want to research one more thing, but as you said, if you don't see the process all the way through, it's hard to give direction.
Yeah, and you can't, and you also, I mean, I have worked with a lot of technical people, but also a lot of researchers and consultants, and you want to avoid the what analysis paralysis, right? Like, there's
Hmm.
always going to be more
Hmm.
data or information, like in the
Right.
age that we live in the access to information that we have, and you want to keep people from rabbit holing and
Right.
going too
Right.
far. in
Because
the wrong direction
yeah.
because, you know, I mean, you're a consultant, like time is money, you know,
Hmm.
and the better you are at something, you know, the more money you're going to make off of it. And
Right.
the way that you learn that is, I think, you know, you work with the people around you, and,
Yeah.
you know, you share that knowledge. I think a
And
lot of
that's
people, yeah,
it's
go
how
ahead.
people learn too, right? I mean, we cannot unless we're iterating, unless we're getting feedback. I mean, it is uncomfortable, but you got to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I love that you said analysis paralysis because I think that goes overall to the whole idea of collecting data and coming up with insights from it. So I'm wondering if you could tell us, like, soup to nuts in customer experience or any sort of process to come up with insights. You know, what is it that does it start with the right questions? Tell us the process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, one of the things that we talked about was, you know, you had asked like, how does a background in writing lead you to where you
Mm-hmm.
are? And I think one of the things that I've taken away from that experience is like who, what, when, where, why,
Hmm.
how, and in terms
Hmm.
of data, how many. So, you know, like who's the client, who's the customer, you know, where are they talking? Where are you going to get this data from? How much
Hmm.
data do you have? You know, when do you need these things?
Right.
You know, when you're doing an analysis in terms of research, it's sample sizes and volume, it's
Mhm.
how many, but then understanding when you have an edge case that might actually be something
Yeah.
that's important. And so I think it really comes down to collaborating with whoever your client is and
Hmm.
making sure that you understand the business question that they're trying to answer, what it is they're trying to do, so that then you can structure your approach to gathering data, to understanding who it is you need to talk to in the right
Hmm.
way.
Do you ever get the feeling that people are asking the right question?
Sometimes, no, they're not asking the right question. And I found a lot of the times that I wasn't asking the right question. And
Hmm.
maybe because I was stuck in the mode of I have this job to do and I'm going to do it. And I have a
Hmm.
set of questions that I'm going to bring to the table that have worked in the past. You know, and you apply them in different instances. And sometimes you take for granted, I guess this was the big one, you take for granted that the person that you're actually talking to is clear on what they're trying to do. And so
Hmm.
you sort of take them at their word as
Yeah.
opposed to asking some additional questions that
Hmm.
may open up a
Right.
broader spectrum or a broader set of possibilities.
Hmm.
Um, because often, you know, when in the work that I had done, you know, there's often the client that I'm working with directly, but then they have a boss that I rarely talk to, and that person has a boss. And I think to get back to asking the right kind of questions, I think you have to think through that chain of command in order to figure out, you know, I know that you came to me with this question, but maybe there's something else behind
Hmm.
it that we should look at.
Right.
And the other thing that, you know, I started this career path in social media research at the beginning, you know, in I think it was I had my first job in it in 2008, and a lot of that was we would answer a question, but in the process of answering the question, you'd find out many, many other things. And you would say, you know, here's, you know, whatever the response, you know, whatever the findings were, whatever the insights were, and how do you communicate that to the person that you're working with who may not actually care about it? You know, like
Hmm.
customer service people probably can't use product or marketing insights and
Hmm.
vice versa. You know, marketing people are
Right.
not necessarily interested in problems with the product and they don't
Yeah.
have a chain of command that they can like feed that set
Yeah.
of
Well,
insights.
that's such an interesting point. So you have to pick it based on the audience that you have. You sort of have to pick and choose what insight
You do. Yeah.
applies and what's actionable for them.
Yeah, and that's why I liked getting into the world of customer experience. The people that I worked with in the teams, this sort of concept of customer experience management, the idea was a function that sits inside of an organization that sort of sits across, you know,
Hmm.
these organizations, you know, to solve a problem related to digital transformation or the impact. One of the things that I, you know, have focused on a lot is how do all these technologies have started to impact how it is that we do business? And I entered that from social media, like how do these platforms and new apps and everything change how companies have to interact with their customers, but also the types of data that they can get back about their customers. But then, like I was thinking about something I was reading today, like how does the cloud impact how organizations do business, which as someone who works in technology sort of takes these things for granted. And you
Mhm.
work for a large organization that has been around for a long time. It gives you a bit of a broader perspective of how hard is it to get
Right.
things into the cloud. We think about all these digitally native companies, and it's a lot easier for them.
Give us an example of a digitally native.
So like Airbnb, right?
Oh,
Or Facebook, right? Anything,
hmm.
Uber, all the apps that you have on your phone. Like
So they weren't brick and mortar that
they,
transformed their business.
right, they didn't have a legacy
Yep.
model, right? There was
Hmm.
no, I mean, in relation to cloud, like there was no on-prem,
Hmm.
right? Like
Right.
it's all in the cloud, and
Right.
it's all quick and test and learn
Hmm.
and that approach. And I
Yeah.
think, but just to go back for a second, I mean, like AI and Gen AI,
Hmm.
like is that same thing? Like how are these tools, and we're in the middle of it and we're all
Hmm.
looking through it, like changing how it is that we interact with the world, how we do our jobs, how we get information.
Well, and that's such an interesting point because there will be companies that will only come up in the Gen AI era, and there's
Yeah.
other companies that will have to transform.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing a lot of those companies now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
I can't. You see I don't know, on LinkedIn. I'm sure
Yeah.
that
Right.
everyone on
Right.
LinkedIn
Right.
has seen the wallpaper, the one slider with like thousands of companies. Or
Hmm.
I mean, but what was the story that I read earlier this week about Builder AI, which was billed itself as an AI company, was just a bunch of developers in India that were developing applications. So
Brute
it was
forcing it.
vaporware, or not
Yep.
even vaporware, just sort of like, some cloak and yeah, anyways.
Yeah. Some hype.
Yeah.
But you and I are parents. I mean, that's how we got to know each of these delightful kids who are always asking the questions. I mean, like what you were saying about um, companies not necessarily knowing what they were trying to ask. And we get this with our
Yeah.
kids all the time. First of all, they have a small data set,
Yeah,
right? So they'll come up with hypotheses about their experience based on a small data set and come up with some insight based on that, right?
definitely.
you
Yeah.
know, Whether it's ants or, whatever else or what other kids are doing, you know. And so what strikes me about this whole process of gathering insight is that we do it in all sorts of ways. We
Oh
do it
yeah.
as parents, we do it as kids and people and partners. Has your work in a couple of questions here. Sorry, I'm going to stack them up
Sure.
in as I shouldn't do. But is there a way that you found to pass on insights to your daughter? Has your work helped you figure out how to pass on wisdom?
I think so. I think that I have, and so what I think it's done is I think it's helped me show her how to ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
And she's 10,
Mm-hmm.
my daughter's 10. So there's
Mm-hmm.
still a long way to go, and and one of the other things, I mean, we talk about how do you navigate YouTube Kids or looking up stuff on the internet, and like I'll stop her and like ask her to show me what she's looking at, and I point out what all the ads are and like how all that works and some of the
Interesting.
back end. I think that that's one of the things. I know that our kids are in Seattle public schools.
Mm-hmm.
There's some conversations about digital literacy, but I think that's a super important
Mm-hmm.
conversation that we have a lot of. And I think one of the things that we talk about is, and I know this is not a direct answer to your question, but like voice activated assistants, and I won't name any
Mm-hmm.
companies, but like,
Mm-hmm.
voice activated assistants in your home. And she wants one. And my wife and I are both just like, no,
Yeah.
no, no, it's not, because it's not really necessary. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
utility there, but and she loves to cook. I like got her a digital timer. If you want to set a timer, there's a timer right there. You don't need to ask to set a timer.
Right.
But and I think it's more like my approach is just asking questions
Mm-hmm.
and knowing how to bring information together. I think that that's the other thing that I have from working in this space tried to bring to her is how do you consolidate things into an understandable, package.
How do you synthesize it into a story, really, right?
Yeah, and we talk, she has to we talk a lot about writing and how do you write things.
Mm-hmm.
I write, my wife writes, Rachel, and so we try and help her with that. Like, how do you communicate? And I think because that's such an important thing. I think we talked about this a little bit. I've done a lot of work with data scientists, and I've worked with some data scientists. All of them have been great at what they do. Like, I'm lucky enough to have worked with a lot of really super smart people, and some of them are a lot better at communicating than others are. And, I have siblings. I talked to my older sister about this, but like, I have some sort of, I don't know, ability, learned or otherwise,
Mm-hmm.
um, to like be able to interact with people who are like take technically complicated things and turn them into easily understandable ideas, or at
Yeah.
least be able to communicate what someone is talking about from a technical perspective. And I think
Yeah.
that's a lot of and I learned a lot actually from the designers that I've worked with about, sure, you can do it in words, but then everything is
Mhm.
so compact. So how do you do it
Yeah.
visually? And what is the language that you use to
Mm-hmm.
do that? And so to go back, like, I think, the world has changed so much since we were kids
Mm-hmm.
and we're in the middle of it, that the pace of change is accelerating, I guess. We're
Mm-hmm.
at the upswing of the exponential curve and all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so like figuring out, how I can impart important lessons to her at 10 that will keep her moving in the right direction.
The asking of the questions, the synthesizing of data, and just even the small point that you made about the awareness of what you're taking in, whether
Yeah.
it's
Yeah, and just the environment that we live in. So one of the things I've seen examples of how this works. She loves to cook. She got into it really big in the pandemic. And so we've talked about how do you take different cake recipes and look at them, or different recipes for whatever it is that you want to cook, and combine them to get something new. Or, as the thing that my wife does a lot better than I do in the kitchen, which is how do you understand a recipe to the point where you can then just use your baseline knowledge of all cooking and all recipes that you have in
Mm-hmm.
order to like adapt it in a
Right,
way that you want to.
right.
And you know, how do you think about your audience? Like, she likes to make desserts. I have a niece who is what is she has, gluten. She's gluten intolerant. I don't think she's
Mm-hmm.
celiac. She has gluten intolerant. So Vivian like wants to make dessert for everyone. So she
Mm-hmm.
has, for her cousin, she gets, she makes meringues because she's considerate of like the environment and the
Yeah,
people. She's thinking about her audience. She's tailoring whatever she's doing to her audience. These are all things that made me successment in doing
right.
what it is.
I love this cooking analogy because it is what you're doing with the data. You're coming, you or and to prepare insights, you bring
Yeah.
up, have all the recipes, you have all the raw ingredients, and you're making a product and you're thinking about the audience
Yeah.
for it, right?
Yeah, and I think I got lucky because I was able to learn. So, like I said, this all started when social media was brand new. So the
Because,
role,
sorry, can I interrupt you for a second?
yeah, sure.
In 2008, when you started this, Facebook wasn't even
No,
I mean, Facebook started in 2009, didn't it?
I think so. Or what was online? A lot of the data that we were
Yeah.
collecting was like forum data,
Yep.
news data.
Right.
Like you would probably like, I think Reddit was
A
online at that
Yeah.
point.
AOL user groups.
No, well, I mean, we could talk, no, because those were all walled gardens, like Facebook.
Mm,
Like Twitter was
mm-hmm.
online.
Mm-hmm.
Twitter was there, really fun, talking about asking the wrong questions. This was I remember this so vividly. We got hired by a company to do research. I worked for a platform called Visible Technologies. It has been acquired. I'm not sure exactly which one of the social listening
Mm,
platforms it's in now. Maybe Meltwater. I could be wrong about that. And we were hired to do an analysis of what people were saying about their brand on Twitter at the time,
Mm.
which was a weird thing. And so we did this report and we spent 4 weeks doing it. And like we had all these insights and all this information about how they could use the platform and how they could use our tool to be better about community. I got on the call and the woman looked at me and she said, she's like, I just want to stop you right there. She's like, can you just explain to me what Twitter is?
Oh, how
She's like, I don't,
interesting.
she's like, I know that we contracted with you to do this thing, like my team, but
Yeah,
literally, like, can you just tell me what it is
right.
that we're talking about? And so, like, I had, and that was, a moment of like, how, like, how do you pivot? Because I
Yeah,
had like closed the book of everything that I was going to talk to her about. I had this whole plan.
yep,
It was just like, let's just talk about this digital media, social media
right,
space that we're living in
right.
at the time.
That's
But
an incredible story. And and some of these technologies are hard to grasp. I mean, we do sometimes have to start back at the basics. And
at the time, they hired me because they needed people who could read the comments and consolidate them. So there was some NLP involved, not a
Mhm.
lot. There was a sentiment engine, but like we all know, I mean, most of the people listening to this
Yeah,
probably know how good those are, which is
yeah.
a lot better now than they used to be.
NLP stands for,
Natural language
yeah,
processing,
yeah.
right? And so that's, you would do that with just an AI model now.
Hmm.
But the data sets were so big. So anyways, we were just reading and writing, and that's
Hmm.
all we were doing. And that's sort of why they hired me. Like, oh, you had a degree in creative writing. Probably, and there was a networking component involved, but really it was like, oh, you can probably read all these things and like write about them.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we had to do a lot of was descriptions of the sites that we were collecting the data from. It's like, what are these sites? And there
And
were,
who
yeah,
are the people using it?
yeah, I mean that's harder to know, which is always the knock on social media, like
Hmm.
because and even then it was like the anonymity was so much more. Like
Hmm.
we didn't know, like
Hmm.
it was just a guess. But like if you're on a car forum, like probably more likely a man than a woman, and
Hmm.
probably someone over the age of 18 because they have to own the car. Like there's
Hmm.
all these assumptions you can make about it, but that's the difference between that kind of research on unstructured data
Hmm.
versus, survey data, which is in the world of customer experience, like that's the more common
Hmm.
input, which is, we're going to run surveys and we're going to ask people all these questions. And then, we're going to know a lot about the people. And one of the
Right.
things that I was trying to do is how do you take the unstructured data and pair it with the
Hmm.
structured data? How do you, like take the fact that a lot of the companies, a lot of employees now are talking about their employers online in ways they didn't used to in the past. So how
Hmm.
can you use what you know in order to gather insights about those people
Hmm.
or their products? And then again, it goes back to like, how do you get the insight to the right person? And that was like the big a big real big challenge because I think
Hmm.
we one of the things we talked about was organizational silos and
Right.
conflicts across silos, and there can only be one CEO.
Yeah. And the sharing across silos and how that often doesn't happen because people think if they keep their kernel of expertise to themselves, it doesn't.
Yeah, control and power,
Yeah.
control and power. Yeah.
Which brings it full circle to our first story about our designer that didn't want to share his files, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, that's what a lot of creative people are, right? Like that's why
Hmm.
you have to give them the space,
Yeah. But
because they have their own set of insights, right? That are
hmm
totally different, and
hmm yeah. But I love, I kind of love this from the, 10,000 foot level, which is, it's the collecting of data that doesn't, that has basis and it has meaning, but
yeah.
only when you can tell a story from it.
Yeah. Oh, you got to contextualize it. Yeah,
Yep.
that is the important thing is how do you put this in the right context?
Because just like any experience throughout our days, we're going around, we're capturing data, and sooner or later we realize, oh, it's warm out, or whatever it is that we put together, or I'm hearing all the birds singing, it must be spring. We're doing that activity constantly.
Yeah. Or, there's a business cycle and there's a product release cycle. And, like, I don't even know. I
Yeah.
can't give like you buy a camera in March because, the new versions came out
Yeah.
in February and timing is not right, but you're,
Yep.
you get a better deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
But
end
yeah,
of year car sales or
right. You
whatever
go
it
to
is.
exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there are these things that if you're not, and I think that's one of the challenges as a consultant, which is why, a lot of the focus at the very end of my recent career as a consultant was how do you specialize in an industry? Like, how do you, because then you know what the business cycle is and what the ups and downs are and
Mm-hmm.
like what the sales cycle is. And
Right.
if someone needs 18 months or 24 months to do something as opposed to like the startup or the digital world that I lived in, which was like 18 months. What are you talking about? Like you got 3 months to do this and like
Right.
you're not, yeah.
Right. Right. Because if you deliver insight of any kind at the wrong time in the cycle, it's
Yeah.
kind of meaningless, right?
Can be old, they can be dated. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the benefit of, and I think doing longitudinal studies, I think that's also the benefit. And I think that's where like a real insights program is
Mm-hmm.
important.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're because you're doing it on an established cadence, you know who your audience is,
Mm-hmm.
and you start to get into a feel of like where you can actually start to push the envelope. Like
Right.
what's novel, what do we know? And
Mm-hmm.
and if you get into that kind of relationship, then your client, I guess I did that sort of thing for a CMO for a while.
Mm-hmm.
How do you help them understand when they need to take their social capital to their partners and say, I know this is not my area, but you know what, folks, like
Mm-hmm.
we should think about this. We found this thing. Like, does anyone want to do anything with it?
Right.
And it's funny
Because
because, oh,
that's
go
the
ahead.
power of insight, right? I mean, insight should be able to, when we share it, breed new energy and life into anything.
Yeah, it should enable actions. Like
Mm-hmm.
that was where, like how do you, so you collect the data, you ask the question, what's the so what in the data? Great. So
Mm-hmm.
now you have an insight. I know what the so what is about this. And then what can you do with it? And that there was a lot of the, research teams, social media teams, there's a lot of instances where you could see what they could do with it, but unless you had access to the right stakeholders, nothing was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's where you would, go like, oh, I have found this great thing. Like, did you know, blah, blah, blah. And some other team is like, yeah, we've known that for a long time. Like that's not news. That's not news here. That's news to you, but that's not news to us. And we're like, oh
Yeah.
well, it's not news to you. Why are you not doing anything about it? Like seeing
Right.
this.
Right. Right. Because insights and action should follow.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Because if you have a problem, like now you're seeing it over here. Sometimes that's what it takes, though, in a large organization. We've both worked in large organizations,
Yeah.
small and medium-sized businesses or even independent people or startups, like I think they have that problem less. And you go back to
Yeah.
digitally native companies, what is it? Instagram had 13 people. Like there was probably a lot of sharing and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
success. I
Mm-hmm.
heard an interview with one of the founders of that organization recently, and he said 13 people, and then he said, "Oh, we could probably have done it with less."
My gosh. Isn't that amazing?
Who did you not need?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love this conversation because I mean, I think it's so fascinating, your
Yeah.
work, what you've done, but it's so fascinating to think about how it applies to everything else that we do, synthesizing data and turning it into insights that we can offer to others,
Yeah,
share our
so I mean,
experience.
the question about how do you bring this to parenting, like I hadn't
Yeah.
even really thought about it, but
Yeah.
I clearly do. I mean, you spend so much time at work, like how could you not, right?
Right. Right. But only that. I just was thinking about Arthur Brooks's book From Strength to Strength, and he's a social scientist, I think, from Harvard. But he talks about, especially when we're young, we have a lot of fluid intelligence, that raw computing power, that, we solving math problems on the fly, blah, 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 that kind of writing poetry, that creativity takes a lot, sort of massive calculation that we're not doing. And then he talks about crystallized intelligence, which is really synthesizing information. And there's a continuum that we work more towards crystallized intelligence later in life, maybe at 50, but not necessarily age related. But, you see it with our kids, synthesizing thing, having that perspective, seeing that bigger picture. It's not, they don't have that yet,
Right.
but they're learning to walk and talk and read and write and all these other things that are, engaging their brains. So somehow in there, we're applying our crystallized intelligence and our bigger data sets to their world, right?
And it made me think you see it happen, right? Your child comes to you 3 days after
Yeah.
something happened and like asks you this very pointed question. It's like, oh, well, that was clearly bouncing around in your head for a while. Like,
Yes, yes. But they didn't have anything to bounce it off of. Okay, reminds me of a funny story. I was at the toy store with my 5-year-old son, and he wanted to buy a pogo stick. And I was like, usually I try to let, if you're spending your money, you can buy whatever you want. And I'll try to provide input. But, really, you got to figure out what you want to do. But the pogo stick, and it was expensive. And I was like, oh no, nobody uses a pogo stick for more than 5 minutes. You can't buy I mean, I'm like, I've seen the data on this. Nobody, you get it. It looks cool. It's really fun. People will come over and want to try it, but they'll only do it for 5 minutes too. I mean, there's the 1 in 1,000 person that will learn basketball tricks on a pogo stick, but nobody uses a pogo stick. Do not spend your money on it. And he just looked at me like, okay.
like, yeah, I mean, if he wants to come and try it, we have two that are from, I don't know, probably 1970 something. There's not a plastic part on either of them. So
Yeah, and they last forever, right?
they do last forever.
Okay. So, do you guys use the pogo sticks?
Yeah, she does. She uses it, but not very often and very long.
Okay, I know where to send.
Well, and it was funny because it came back out just recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I don't know why, but it's like anything, like your kids just,
Yeah.
that thing you're going to get rid of. And then they're like, no, that's the most important thing in my life.
Yes. Oh, yes, I know that.
But yeah, the pogo stick did come back. So if he wants to come over and try, we have two, but
Okay.
they are ancient.
Right.
She was doing it the other day and it's metal. And so it was like, and you're bouncing on it. And so it started to like rub against, like really like give her leg burn. And maybe that's why people don't use them for very, I'm like, maybe you should put some pants on.
See, that's applying some parental crystallized intelligence on a problem that's going to cause a problem for you.
He was like, no, just rubbed it and then started jumping again on the pogo stick.
Karl, I love this conversation. Thank you for coming on, sharing all your insight.
Sure. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to come back.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Wynne.
Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Campora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com, avitiva.com.